How high are the stakes in Soledar, a salt mining town of 10,000 in eastern Ukraine, the new focal point of a war where the Kremlin badly needs some good news from the battlefield? We'll ask who controls the town that's a gateway to the Donbass city of Bakhmut, where the Russians have been pushing for months. If Russia does indeed capture Soledar, whose win will it be? The mercenaries of Wagner claim to be spearheading the battle there. If the paramilitary force financed by Putin confidant Yevgeny Prigozhin fares better than a Russian military that's again this Wednesday shaken up its command, does it mean dueling state and private armies? Or is this just all part of Moscow's method? Our own James Andre and Maisa Awad got a first-hand look at the front lines. Coming up, the premiere of their exclusive report from Bakhmut, the France 24 debate, looking at that bloody fight for Ukraine's east. And joining us from Oxford in England is Samuel Romani, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
From Warsaw, Maria Zolkina, Head of Security Studies at the Ukrainian think tank, the Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good evening.
From London, Ron Thornton, Senior Lecturer in Defence Studies at King's College London. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
France 24 Senior Correspondent James Andre with us as well. James, you were with Maisa Awad. We're going to see your report in just a second. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. It's not defined by trench warfare, but the battle for eastern Ukraine's been compared a lot to World War I these days. Artillery fire all along the front, and the Russians ready to sacrifice human lives, lots of troops, as they bet on a breakthrough. Yes, James and Maisa Awad filing this report.
Bakhmut, mid-December 2022. The city has become Ukraine's most active and violent frontline. It's divided by the Bakhmutka River. For months, Ukrainian forces have held on to the western part of the city. In the east, the Russians have entered the outskirts, and there's fighting on the streets. Both sides have deployed artillery, and they're firing day and night.
Okay. Just go. Far. Yes. Exactly. So straight as far as possible. This way.
These Ukrainian soldiers are returning from the front line, just a few hundred meters away.
The information is secret, but I can tell you it's a gunfight. Our forces shoot them and they fire back. We push them back a little. It's going okay. Every battle is a tragedy, death. It's someone's life, future of their families. Ukraine will prevail.
This building is used as an evacuation point for wounded soldiers.
Now there is working our guys. They are too close, 200 meters, 300 meters maximum, and they are fighting. But you can. You see, they want to take the city because of ways. It's very important city for them. They can start also to attack Sloviansk, Kramatorsk. We cannot give them this chance.
Civilians have grown oblivious to the fighting around them after months of constant shelling.
Every day they are walking here. They don't care and don't scare. This situation from them is normal. Okay, better.
Could you please leave this area?
What are you doing in this sector? It's being shelled.
Bakhmut was a city of 70,000 people before the war. Now, it is a battlefield. There's no water, electricity, gas, phone connection, or internet. Anna, Nikolai, and their 3 children rush to one of the city's humanitarian aid centers. Residents come here to charge their phones, use the Wi-Fi, warm up, and find some company.
A shell landed on our building. Not in our apartment, but in the neighbor's flat. My husband and I had to put out the fire by ourselves.
My school is destroyed. It was school number 5.
If you want to evacuate, there's a house. It's a nice place. They're offering the whole house. I can make a call right now. It's a very nice place. It'll be perfect for the kids.
We understand that there are kind people who can host us and can help us. But eventually they'll find themselves in the same situation. And then they'll need help too. For now, the fighting is here, but it could spread there too.
Mikhailo, the volunteer, couldn't convince Anna and her family to leave.
People have been living in basements. All they had in there was Russian radio. They spent a lot of time in an information vacuum. They were told that husbands would be forced to enroll in the army or be sent to jail. They were told a lot of things.
Over 90% of Bakhmut's residents have fled. Life is hard in the city. Some of those who've stayed eventually give up, like Angelina.
It's awful, just awful. They're shelling us. You walk around and wonder when you might get hit. You live every day as if it were your last. It's scary. The atmosphere is psychologically oppressive. I want to leave because I can't do anything here. I just want to have a wash. I'm sorry to say it.
3 days ago, artillery destroyed the flat where Angelina was living.
These are the windows, this is the kitchen, and that one's our bedroom. That's where we slept. There was a big bed. Now everything's covered in broken glass, and the walls have completely collapsed. I was deafened. The shockwave hit me on my right side. I was limping.
This strike convinced Angelina and her boyfriend Maxime to evacuate Bakhmut. 6 weeks earlier, the young woman had already been forced to abandon the family apartment.
Is my home here?
The building was hit and collapsed. Most residents died. By chance, Angelina's whole family was out that day, so they all survived.
People died here, trapped under the rubble. They had to extract the bodies. A firefighter died. I'm sorry, it's really hard. I want to cry. Now most of my relatives have gone and I want to evacuate too. But my father won't go. If he does, he'll choose Russia. We have different views. I'm a patriot, and in the family, we prefer not to talk about that.
In this Russian-speaking region, the conflict has torn families apart between pro-Ukrainians and pro-Russians. Angelina mentioned her father is a very religious man. We attend Sunday Mass at Bakhmut's main Russian Orthodox church, hoping to find him. Service is celebrated in the crypt. Alexander, Angelina's father, is indeed attending with 2 of his sons.
воскресным днем, дорогие братья и сестры, поздравляю. Желаю вам всем крепкого здравия, души спасения, помощи Божией. И дай Бог, чтобы Господь всех нас сохранил, чтобы мы живыми и здоровыми остались. Подкрепи вас, Господь, дорогие, в трудовую неделю. Господь.
Alexander accepts to talk to us at his home. His house is set right in the middle of the battlefield.
The shell fell here. Our window was shattered. We were lucky, so lucky. Most of the shrapnel flew this way. We were lucky it exploded to the side.
Alexander and his sons have adapted to daily life under constant shelling.
Well, now we're kind of used to it, but at the beginning we couldn't sleep at night. It was so scary. The whole house was shaking. The floor was trembling like jelly, literally like jelly.
The war has ripped this family into 3 parts. Alexander's wife has fled to Russia with her grandson. Angelina is about to join her pro-Ukrainian brother in the West, and Alexander has decided to stay here with 2 of his sons.
I believe that Ukraine, if you want to call it Ukraine, is one country with Russia and Belarus, one people, one tree with different branches, and only one root. It hurts. Angelina is a difficult question for me. I think she doesn't really want to see us anymore. No one forced her to leave. She left on her own initiative. No one kicked her out. She just didn't like our way of living. She wanted freedom. Freedom in the worst sense of the word.
Inside the city, Ukrainian soldiers have fortified their positions, digging themselves into trenches.
If you want to live, you dig. The deeper you can hide, the more chances you have to survive.
The trenches are new. We're finishing them. We're making loopholes. If the Russians come crawling from this side, we'll have good firing positions.
The battle is raging in the eastern part of the city. Ukrainian forces say they've recaptured a few blocks, pushing the Russian soldiers and Wagner Group mercenaries back.
They must be on psychedelic drugs or totally brainwashed. They just don't give up. They're unstoppable. It's awful. They're like orcs. The situation is complicated. We eliminate them, but they crawl back again and again like cockroaches. We have many losses, a lot of wounded soldiers.
The Ukrainian army does not give exact casualty figures, but a constant flow of wounded soldiers are ferried out of Bakhmut to military hospitals.
Ранение колена, тут шина наложена, кровотечение остановлено. Ранее это травматическая ампутация пальца правой кисти. Тоже обработано. Литр инфузии 250 кетамина час назад.
Турникеты есть?
Турникеты есть, но отпущены.
Попущены.
Все.
5 ambulances arrive in less than an hour. We're told this hospital alone receives around 100 wounded soldiers a day.
I was hit. It was a mortar shell. It ripped my leg apart. That's it. What can I say? I'm fine. My leg hurts. Apart from this, everything is good.
Everything was going fine. Then the shooting started. When it became very intense, everyone hid in the trenches. I felt a very sharp pain. I understood it was shrapnel. I tried moving my fingers. They did move, but I realized that my bones were broken. I heard a crunching sound when I moved my fingers. The toughest fights are going on inside Bakhmut now. The toughest. It's really hell.
Next morning, Angelina and Maxime are ready to go. We meet them in a basement where they have their bags packed.
Let's go. I'm happy to leave the war zone, but I'm sad to leave my city behind. I hope I'll come back one day.
The evacuation bus is driven by volunteers who pick people up from the frontline cities and take them to safety. Today, Angelina and Maxime are the only passengers.
Sometimes it's 2 people, other times it's 15. It depends. The problem is that the cell phone network is down. So we just show up here at regular times and also pick up people who manage to call us.
I cried yesterday. It's really hard. I have no desire to leave. But there's no work, no money, you're cold and hungry all the time. I want to live, not just to survive.
Next stop, Dnipro, 260 kilometers to the west. There, Angelina and Maxime will have to start a new life while they wait for peace to return to Bakhmut. On the way out of the city, the university is on fire, hit by yet another shell.
If you missed part of it, it's on going to be on our website, France24.com. James Andre and Maïsa Awad. James, very poignant to see that family divided. One side siding with Moscow and the other siding with Kyiv, and the tears on Angelina's face. Something else we notice in that report is there is this constant thud of shelling throughout the report, and you sort of, after a while, just like probably you and on the ground, stop paying attention to it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing which is the most surprising about Bakhmut, and it's something I've not seen anywhere else. It's this constant artillery, absolutely constant. And the other thing is Grad missiles. Now, we did capture that on tape a couple of times, but it was just incredible when you hear these barrage of missiles departing. That's multiple rocket launchers. They're very, very impressive as well. So you have this constant war noise going on in the background. And what's surprising is that you see a lot of people basically living their lives amidst all that. Obviously, you have
there are still civilians there.
There are civilians. Now, you've got to understand that 90% of the population is left, in excess of 90% of the population. So the people who have left either have elderly relatives they're caring for. We've heard various reasons for not going. Families saying, look, we do not want to leave our flat. We're afraid that it might be looted while we're gone. People actually watching their neighbors' flats as well. Other people saying, look, I make 2,000 hryvnia a month. If I move and I leave my flat, I'm going to find myself homeless. I don't want that to happen to me. So, people with various reasons to stay, but staying. And there is one thing, is of course the politics of it. This is Eastern Ukraine. Before the war, before all this started, before 2014, this was a Russian-speaking area with a lot of pro-Russian people in it. And some people, of course, are still pro-Russian. So a lot of people who've been staying also are, basically either on the fence, avoiding to think about politics, or indeed, rather pro-Russian. And you do see a lot of them over there. So that's the situation when it comes to civilians over there. But what's really incredible is to see them walking around. Basically, you have these massive explosions, and they don't even react.
Don't even react. Why has the Russians been effectively using soldiers, as you heard that one Ukrainian, that weary Ukrainian soldier say, seeing that they kill the Russian soldiers and the next day more come back? Why is Russia going all out for Bakhmut?
Well, it's going all out for Bakhmut because it is very much, this focal point of the Ukrainian defense. It is a symbol as well. Now, indeed, we've said this, of course. The Kremlin wants Bakhmut for many reasons. There are tactical reasons, such as it is controlled roads to Sloviansk, also roads to Kramatorsk. So yes, there are many important roads that go through Bakhmut. Also, it has become a symbol. It has become a contested area also because Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, has made it a trophy. He wants to take Bakhmut himself, and this is something that's also quite important. And indeed, if the Russians manage to take Bakhmut, it will be an important hole in the Ukrainian defenses.
Maria Zolkina, this fight's been going on for months. It's more than just symbolic if the Russians were to retake Bakhmut.
Of course, it will influence the situation on the ground, but as military experts say, so neither Bakhmut nor Solidar is of strategic importance, because if we will compare different cities like Slavyansk or Kramatorsk are of much more strategic importance in Donetsk region than even Bakhmut itself. But nevertheless, the logic of Ukrainian side now is that we should stand where we stand, exactly because if we step away from Bakhmut, for instance, or from Solidar, just the battles will continue on a new piece of land and there will be no difference. From this point of view, yes. And by the way, the Solidar battle itself shouldn't be considered as something separate. This is like a part of the same front line with Bakhmut, with Opytne, with Avdiivka. So it's like the general front line part, which is being like constantly shelled and pushed forward by mainly Wagner Group, not regular forces.
Mainly Wagner Group, not regular forces. Before we discuss the role of Wagner, Rob Thornton, what's the latest you're seeing as to Solidar itself?
I think Solidar hasn't been completely taken by Prigozhin's Wagner troops. There are elements of it still in Ukrainian hands, as we know. But Prigozhin is using this as a symbol to enhance his own reputation within the Russian body politic. Basically, if his Wagner group can take the whole of Solidar, and then it's, as you say, it's symbolic, it's a major coup for him and for his Wagner group. But we must remember that the Wagner are being supported by Russian army military artillery. They can't do this mission on their own. The Wagner are predominantly just basically foot soldiers, infantry. They need support from the Russian artillery, which enables them to engage in conflicts, in battles like Solidar.
Yeah, that is key what you're saying, because there is this narrative many of you are clutched onto that right now it's open warfare within the Kremlin. Let's take a look just a minute here at the events of the last 24 hours. Wagner Group posting to Telegram that it had taken Solidar. Wagner showing a photo purportedly of its troops inside the town's biggest catch, its salt mine, and a statement by Yevgeny Prigozhin, which claims that, quote, only fighters of Wagner PMC took part in the assault. However, that was on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the Russian presidency stating otherwise.
Let's not rush. Let's wait for official statements. We have positive dynamics in advancing. Success in military actions will be achieved when we will achieve goals set by the Supreme Commander Vladimir Putin during the special military operation, although tactical gains are very important.
So, Samuel Romani, it sounds as though it's a rebuff from the Kremlin when you listen to that at face value. Wagner's boss doubling down in the last hour, saying, yes, we have taken the town, so again denying the Kremlin. But you also heard Rob Thornton there saying, this isn't like competing bounty hunters. They work in tandem, these irregulars with the Russian military.
Yeah, the Wagner Group definitely is a complement and its extended arm of the Russian military. It is a paramilitary force. If you believe U.S. estimates, it provides 40,000 prisoners who are conscripts, as well as 10,000 private military contractors who provide additional manpower. Obviously, Evgeny Prigozhin does have a fraught relationship with Sergei Shoigu, which is not new. That's a problem that dates back to their campaign in Syria, when the Wagner Group was conducting defensive deals with Assad's regime, often over the head of the defense ministry. But that doesn't mean that they are completely at odds to the point in which they're going to be working across purposes on the battle lines. It's more of a personal rivalry rather than a military cross purposes one. But I think that the Russian statement from Peskov is probably objectively closer to the truth, because even Prigozhin yesterday was admitting that there were problems on the western outskirts of Soledar, and there were urban battles. And now suddenly he's saying he's captured the city. So and the Ukrainians are saying that the city hasn't fallen. So it's probably Prigozhin prematurely trying to declare victory, and the Russian government trying to walk that back.
So a scramble to take claim for the victory. Rod Thornton, is there a problem at the Kremlin?
There probably is. I mean, the Russian army would be very unsure of itself in terms of allowing Wagner to claim this victory. But you notice Dmitry Peskov used this term tactical victory, basically not a strategic victory, i.e. not a big victory. It's just a minor tactical victory if Soledar is taken. It doesn't mean anything on the bigger strategic picture. So, but you can imagine the angst within the Russian army itself that Prigozhin's Wagner private military company is gaining all this perceived glory, while the Russian army itself is being perceived as being inactive. And we might link this to the removal today of Surovikin as the commander of the whole operation in Ukraine, because he's not achieved success, whereas Wagner do appear to be gaining success.
The Russians are very good at communications, because when he was appointed the head of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, he was dubbed as ruthless, as someone who had laid his ground inside of Syria. And now, as you've just heard from Rod Thornton, there's a shakeup inside the military itself. It began Tuesday with Colonel General Alexander Lapin promoted chief of staff of the country's ground forces. Lapin had been sent back to Moscow after troops under his command, most notably, lost Liman to the Ukrainians. That's fueling speculation of rivalries within those pro-Putin spheres. And now, as Rod said, comes news that Russia's again replaced the commander of its campaign in Ukraine, Army Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov, to double up in the job. His predecessor, Sergei Surovikin, stays on as his deputy officially, but it does look like a serious demotion. Maria Zolkina, is this the paramilitaries gaining the upper hand on the regular army?
Actually, regular Russian army has already lost on the battlefield because the call for general mobilization, which was not partial, which was general actually, and it is not over in Russia, it was the result that the best trained, the best in terms of skills Russian regular army units, they failed to reach their preliminary goals. But when we speak about comparison between regular forces on the one hand, which are decreased in terms of their capacities, not maybe in terms of how much weapons they do have, but in terms of their capacities, yes, they have a serious deterioration. And paramilitary groups, so there is a specific, let's say, in really domestic internal competition between Ministry of Defense and paramilitaries. Paramilitary groups like mercenaries as Wagner's, they are needed for cruel, violent operation, especially when it comes to dealing with civilian population. For that reason, they are so famous from negative point of view from Middle East campaigns or Africa campaigns of Wagner. But please keep in mind that politically, Putin's regime is using the image of Prigozhin and Wagner Group as some kind of, let's say, alternative, possible, really militarily alternative to current Putin's regime. So, like, this is the message for the West also. Look, if not me, if not talk to me, then you might be talking in a couple of years to someone who might be even much more cruel and supporting much violent way of doing politics and war. So this is kind of game. And again, another component when you speak about Wagner, another aspect is economic interest. So Wagner is not just gaining money from the Russian budget, but they are interested in gaining resources, properties, enterprises, some natural resources on the captured land. For that reason, they might be, Prigozhin and his team might be personally interested in taking control over Bakhmut and especially Soledar, which is actually one of the biggest salt enterprises and resources in the world, not only in Europe.
To hear you tell it, Maria, it's still Vladimir Putin pulling the strings, even if there are rivalries in the Kremlin.
Of course, there is no difference who is actually leading the joint operation forces, as they call them, exactly because decisions are centralized. And for that reason, Russian president doesn't fire actually anyone officially. He just replaces and rotates people between different positions.
Samuel Romani, it's, as Maria was pointing out, a story that matters on more than one continent. This is this Wednesday, the 10th anniversary of the French intervention in Mali, the French which left last year after an almighty fallout with the junta there, the junta which decided to replace French and other foreign soldiers with the mercenaries of Wagner. We have a report out on our website that shows how ineffective Wagner has been in fighting jihadists in Mali. It's kind of ironic that they're trying to lay claim for being tough guys on the battlefield in Ukraine.
Well, definitely the group was the notion, really, ever since the summer, that somehow they're the most effective unit in the Ukrainian forces that are there. But in Mali, they were woefully ineffective, much like they were in the Central African Republic outside of Bangui or in Mozambique before that. Their track record in forward counterinsurgency operations, where they're not just playing the logistical support role with proxy militias or with other units, is generally very poor. So it's quite surprising that they are trying to present themselves as this patriotic, mobilized unit, even if they do have some more experienced fighters from Chechnya, from Afghanistan, from Syria on the front lines, which are compensating for some of the losses of the elite corps in the early stages of the war.
And of course, James Andre, there is something that the Russians do have as an advantage, and that is the number of personnel they can use in this conflict. Again, we heard the weariness of this Ukrainian fighter in your report. The Russians who it's been rumored are contemplating another call-up of more soldiers.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what's happening is indeed in Bakhmut, the losses are huge on both sides. But we did speak to one of the Ukrainian commanders. Of course, it's impossible to count what's happening, but we were told that, there is a much higher ratio of Russian losses, which is logical. This is urban warfare. This city has been in the front line since 2014, in a sense. So, the Ukrainians have had time to dig themselves in, to prepare, to be. It's a very well-defended city, Bakhmut. So yes,
when we saw in your report the digging of those trenches.
Yeah, that's like the final stages of transforming that city.
But again, it brings us back
fortress.
to that World War I analogy. Is it like World War I? You have the infantry and then an artillery war in support.
Well, in a sense, yes. I mean, if you look at it that way, then, of course, things have changed. What you do see is drones flying over your head. So, it, of course, have changed, the aiming of the artillery, which is much more precise than it used to be. But, things like trenches still work. In a sense, if you have an artillery shell that falls, the shrapnel will go up. If you are entrenched, you are potentially safer. But what we really have seen, and we saw it happening under our eyes, really, was the fact that this city was completely entrenched, within a matter of days, with really, at that stage when we were there, this was end of December, the Russians were really pushing on the outskirts of Bakhmut. And the Ukrainians had a plan which is to hold the city for as long as possible at all cost. And the idea being to inflict a maximum amount of damage and a maximum amount of casualties to, the Russian forces. And indeed, if the ratios that we've been hearing on the ground are true, there were a lot of wounded soldiers coming out of the Ukrainian side, but if it is indeed 5-6-fold on the other side, that of course is dealing a terrible blow to these forces, the Russian forces.
Rod Thornton, again, I go back to these World War I comparisons that everyone's been talking about. French newspaper Le Monde quoting Ukrainian military sources as saying what they've discovered in Soledar is the Russians have been using these highly armed, mobile first waves of infantry coming up to the front line, and perhaps not enough has been concentrated in terms of efforts to hit the artillery that's further back, because once you hit that artillery, those soldiers are basically exposed.
Yeah, it is very much like the First World War. You have forward lines of troops who move forward, normally supported by artillery. But one of the issues is the degree of coordination that you need between the infantry at the front and the artillery in the rear. And if you're a Wagner group and if your artillery is coming from the army, then we can see a lack of coordination there. We also have the problem for the Russians and the Ukrainians that they are running out of artillery shells and rockets, as we see there with the Grad launchers. They are firing these things, both Ukrainians and the Russians. They're using too many artillery shells, they're using too many rockets, using too many missiles, ballistic and cruise missiles. They're using too much. They are now running out of this stuff. And we see on both sides the Russians and the Ukrainians running out of artillery shells. So there's a problem on two fronts, the coordination and the actual shortage of ammunition after so long a war.
Maria Zolkina, you agree? I mean, we heard in that report that, again, that constant thud throughout of mortar and artillery shelling.
Actually, the tactics of Ukrainian forces is to exhaust, as it was correctly said, to exhaust Russian forces who are trying to attack as much as possible. But on the other hand, the tactics of Russian troops is like to send a couple of groups, let's say, untrained, underskilled people who were recently mobilized both in Russia and on recently occupied Ukrainian territories. They're just sending these people in order to exhaust military, technically, the artillery capacities of Ukrainian army. And then when the weapons is simply overheated, actually, technically, they are sending the third or the fourth wave of more professional, either regular or Wagner combatants. That is how it works on the ground. So yes, the problem is not just with, let's say, the number of ammunition which is possessed by Ukrainian army in Bakhmut or in Soledar. The question is in number of artillery equipment itself, because you simply need to replace them. You cannot just shell in unstoppable way during all the days.
Sami Romani, you hear that the Russians effectively ready to just kind of sacrifice that first wave. I mean, they've got a high chance of getting killed or wounded when they go in. How does that play back home? I know you pay attention to what's being said on Russian media.
Well, I think that the way Prigozhin was framing this campaign in Bakhmut was that he's effectively trying to strategically create a meat grinder, effectively a situation where there's going to be an attritional war. There's going to be heavy casualties on both sides, but they're going to try to show that the casualties are going to be heavier on the Ukrainian side. So much so that Prigozhin was even arguing that the main goal for Russia was not even to capture Bakhmut. It was just to try to trap and tie down Ukrainian forces there to free up Russia's hand on offensives in the southern part of the country or elsewhere in terms of defending against counteroffensives. So that's how the Russians have framed this. And the Russians have kind of, therefore, used their media outlets and their Telegram channels to psychologically prepare the people that there's going to be a lot of casualties, there's going to be a lot of bodies coming back home from the front lines inside Bakhmut.
And will people accept it?
Of course, many of these problem is that the thing is, will the people accept it? I mean, the thing is that these people are mostly prisoners, right? And the thing is, the Prigozhin has offered these people amnesty, even though he doesn't have the legal authority necessarily to do that. And that created a lot of friction with regards to his mobilization campaign. Though recently there was a video that he did show himself kind of granting these people amnesty and promises. So that's probably the bigger concern for Prigozhin, rather than the number of casualties on the ground. In fact, Prigozhin was actually photographing himself inside a basement showing all these people being dead and kind of almost like, reveling and celebrating their sacrifice and their patriotism and stuff like this. So I think that they've psychologically adjusted to people to having heavy casualties here, and they're counting on the fact that that Putin is much more worried about pressure from the hardliners and nationalists who are frustrated with the progress of the war than on those liberals who might be sitting back at home and are concerned about what these sacrifices are for.
All right, so that's what's happening in Russia. As we heard Rod Thornton say, on both sides, they're running low on ammo. The other part of this story that we've been watching the last few days is what NATO's role has been. On Wednesday, the U.S. Army invited journalists to film the unloading of large numbers of M1 Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles in the Netherlands, fresh off the boat from Fort Hood in Texas. This after France last week pledged light tanks. And on Tuesday, Germany's foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, on a visit to Kharkiv, came close, very close, but not yet, to confirming that Berlin was next in sending tanks. James Andre, what would more tanks do where you were?
Well, I mean, more tanks is obviously going to help the Ukrainians. I think that we're going to see what happens next. It's freezing right now in Ukraine, and that is something that is going to be a game changer in the days to come. When we were there, temperatures were mild, which means there was a lot of
unseasonably
mud.
mild.
Unseasonably mild, but that means your tanks are stuck in the mud. And this, of course, is having an impact. And this is also why a lot of the fighting is concentrating in Bakhmut. You can't move large quantities of tanks across the fields in Donbass when it's all mud. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the weeks to come if indeed the temperatures are still cold. Right now, it's very cold in and around Bakhmut. It's about minus 15, minus 20 Celsius, which if this carries on for a few days, you're going to start to see the tanks moving. But yes, tanks, of course, are going to be very important. The Ukrainians have been asking for tanks from the West for a very long time. The Europeans and the Americans have been very reluctant. NATO has been very reluctant to give heavy tanks simply because they do not want to be to be caught to be seen as belligerents in this war. So they want to stay on the side of support but not take an active role. And so this is indeed shifting. People are starting to say, right, it's no longer time for this kind of maneuvering. We need to go all in. So we'll have to see what type of tanks are going to come in. France was one of the first to pledge some. Those are the AMX-10 light tanks that are going to be arriving in Ukraine. And we'll have to see what Germany actually does.
And the latest place to pledge is where you are, Mary Zolkina. The Poles this Wednesday announcing they were sending armored vehicles. The shift is coming now. Your thoughts on that?
The shift is already happening, actually, and it started with the decision to send the sophisticated air defense systems to Ukraine, like Iris-T or Patriots from US. We have good news not only from France about the wheeled tanks, light tanks, but also from UK regarding Challenger tanks, which are going to be sent to Ukraine. And Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, these are the countries which are already fulfilling actually better than anyone else everything they have promised so far in comparison to what they have supplied to Ukraine in terms of percentage, this kind of proportion. And Poland has clearly stated today and the days before today that they are ready to send any kind of weapons, including modern Western types of tanks, even fighter jets, even if if there is like a decision of a couple more countries to support Poland, who will be sending it to Ukraine, and to support Ukraine by sending the same types of military equipment and weapons directly from other countries. So Ukraine will receive the tanks this year, no doubts about that. Germany will be under great pressure this month.
The month and perhaps days, James Andre.
Yeah, but the other thing is that there may be an escalation on the Russian side as well. For now, some of the equipment, some of the Russian advanced tanks we've not seen on this battlefield, such as T-14s, Armatas, or T-90s. So they can also potentially escalate. That's another question mark for now.
Are we underestimating the Russians, Rod Thornton?
I don't think we are. I think the Russians are in essence, the army is worn out. And you can talk about bringing in Armata tanks, but there's very few of them. They haven't been battle tested at all. They're being very kind of almost experimental tanks. And we need to be careful of what the West is supplying at the moment. You see pictures there of the Bradleys, and also talk of the Armadas from Germany being supplied to the Ukrainians, but they are just basically armored personnel carriers. They're battlefield taxis. They're not tanks. And there's no, as Maria was saying, it's a big step to provide main battle tanks, MBTs, to Ukraine from the West. The AMX-10 is very much a light tank. It's not a main battle tank. If you're supplying main battle tanks, they are aggressive weapons. They are offensive weapons. So if you're going to supply those to Ukraine, then you are moving from helping Ukraine defensively to helping Ukraine offensively.
And are we at that point?
Over the supply of main battle tanks to Ukraine. It's best in terms of supplying tanks, main battle tanks, the Leopard 2s, the German Leopard 2. And you could provide lots of those to Ukraine if the German government agrees to their movement from not just Germany, from all the other countries that Leopard 2 tanks have been sold to. It's a question of the German government allowing the Leopard 2s to be supplied. The British government has said we're going to supply 10 Challenger 2s, but that's a bit pointless because you need a kind of huge logistic chain for 10 tanks. Where if you supply tanks en masse, like hundreds of Leopard 2s, then the logistic chain makes sense because all the kind of repair equipment, all the ammunition, all the kind of bits and bobs that go that support a main battle tanks are coming from one or supplying one particular main battle tank at the Leopard 2.
That's the fact that the Germans are thinking long and hard before giving the green light. We're out of time, Rod Thornton, but let me just ask you, the fact that you are getting these stepped up pledges, is it just the mission creep that defense industries always push for more? Or is it because NATO genuinely smells blood here when it comes to Russia's weaknesses?
I don't think it's a question of smelling blood. I think it's a question of a change of policy by the governments in the West. Yes, they want to help Ukraine more than defeat Russia. It's kind of just the whole kind of crush of the humanitarian response of the West is kind of calling on countries in the West, NATO countries, to do more to help the Ukrainians rather than to defeat the Russians.
Rod Thornton, many thanks for joining us from London. I want to thank Samuel Romani for being with us from Oxford, Maria Zelkina in Warsaw, France 24's James Andre. Your report, along with my Sawad, is on our website, france24.com. Thanks for being with us here in the France 24 debate.